Here we're going to talk about how to memorize bar exam outlines. It's so important to figure out how you memorize and how you learn the law so that you can study efficiently during bar prep. One of the biggest mistakes that I see students make when they sit down to study for the bar exam is they'll do all these practice questions without even knowing the law. So they dive right into multiple choice questions, but they haven't learned the law yet. And then inevitably they don't score high because, again, they don't know the law. That stresses them out, so they feel like they have to do more questions. Pretty soon they're doing 100 multiple choice questions a day and not even seeing any improvement. Basically, they're working really hard, they're stressing themselves out, but they're not even furthering their goal toward passing the bar exam. So what you want to do is do things in the proper order. Basically, learn the law first and then apply it to practice questions. If you do that, you'll be studying efficiently and effectively, you'll be making the most of your time, and when you start to answer these practice questions, you'll actually see pretty high scores, hopefully, or at least pretty significant improvement as you go along. You won't just be in this vicious cycle of repeating questions and not seeing your score increase. What I found also is that commercial courses don't really tend to emphasize memorization. They don't really teach students how to memorize, and a lot of students that graduate from law school actually don't know how to memorize, particularly those that have had closed book exams throughout law school. Open book exams throughout law school. They've never really felt like they needed to memorize the law or the elements of law, so they haven't really acquired this skill. So here we're going to talk about how to memorize bar exam outlines. What I recommend that you do first is just start with one outline. So for example, let's say you start with torts. That's much easier than trying to learn everything at once. Just focus on one outline at a time and say, this is the outline I'm going to learn. Next, divide it into manageable sections. So for example, you might divide it into intentional torts and then defenses to intentional torts. And then negligence, maybe you'll divide that into its own sections of duty, breach, cause, harm, or whatever makes sense, given how your outline is structured. Okay, then just take one section. Like let's say you start with intentional torts, and that's what you want to learn first. So you want to memorize all of the intentional torts and be able to state all of their elements. That's your first goal. And this is a manageable goal. You're not saying I'm going to learn all 50 pages of my torts outline at once. You're saying I'm going to learn this section and then I'm going to move on. So this is actually good for you. Most people, when they do it this way, don't feel so stressed out because they don't feel overwhelmed when they have manageable steps they can take. Okay, so next, try techniques to learn your outline. The best way to do this is use your learning style. If you tend to be more visual, which most law students are, then what I recommend you do is do something like cover up the law and see if you can quickly rewrite it and jot it down. That's literally how I learned everything in law school, is I would just cover up the intentional torts and say, can I list assault, battery, trespass to chattels, conversion, and list all their elements. And then once I could, which I couldn't the first time I tried, but I'd cover it up, I'd go back, see what I missed, keep trying again until I got them all. Then I'd move on to the next section, so then I had it memorized. Another way to do this if you're visual is to use charts or diagrams, color code your outlines. If you're more of an auditory learner, you might like things like mnemonics or rhymes or repeating the elements of law out loud. You also might want to try different techniques. Maybe you get bored with just doing the same thing over and over again, and that's fine too. Figure out what works best for you because everybody's going to be a little bit different. Okay. So take one section of your outline, memorize that section, memorize intentional torts. Then go on to the next section, like defenses to intentional torts, and do the exact same thing. See if you can list all the defenses and all their elements. All right, and keep doing that. Keep moving on to different sections of your outline. Note that memorization is hard work. You cannot memorize with the TV on in the background, okay? You can't memorize and multitask. When you memorize, it's like running on a treadmill at high speed. It's going to take up all your mental energy, okay? So make sure that you focus on what you're doing and also make sure to incorporate breaks. It would be really supremely difficult to memorize for 4 hours at a time without a break. What I used to do is take a break after 45 minutes or so. I'd take a 5 or 10 minute break. I'd walk around, I'd get a snack, and then I'd come back to it. And that kind of gave my brain a little break and it kind of re-energized me for the next section of my outline. Okay, once you're kind of done, once you're wrapping up your memorization time, go back and review everything that you did. So do intentional torts and defenses to intentional torts in whichever part of your outline that you've gone through. And just review it all one more time. Then put it away. Don't look at it. Do whatever else you're going to do, relax or do multiple choice questions or whatever. Okay, get a good night's sleep. I want to warn you that when you go to bed that first day after reviewing your outline, you're not going to feel good about it. It's still going to take you a while. You're really going to have to think, okay, what are the elements of assault? You're not going to really feel comfortable with it yet. But then when you wake up, look at your outline again, and you will be shocked at how much you remember and how easy it is to recall it. Okay? So the next morning, you'll feel much better about your outline and what you know. So consistently review it after this. What you don't want to do is, memorize torts week 1 of bar prep and know it really well and then put it away and not look at it again until week 9, because you're going to forget that information. Unfortunately, you need to keep repeating it to keep it in your brain. The good news is, though, it takes you much less time to review it after you already learned it. So what I would recommend you do, for example, let's say you review torts week 1. That's like your outline. You're going to memorize that during week 1 of bar prep. Okay, so memorize that outline week 1. Review it twice during week 2. It should be much faster to go through your outline during week 2 because you've already done a lot of the hard work of memorizing. This is really just cementing it in your brain and make sure that you know it. Okay, next, week 3, review it once or twice depending on how comfortable you are with the outline. Then after that, you only have to review it once a week and it'll be quick. You could probably just flip through the outline, flip through the pages, look at it and say, yes, I know this, yes, I know this. Cover up some of the law, quiz yourself or whatever. But you'll feel much more comfortable closer to the end of bar prep than you did the first time you reviewed it. And you'll be keeping this all in your brain, all right? So it is a lot of work, but I would make sure that you actually retain the information that you work so hard to learn, and do that by reviewing your outline at least once a week. It does get kind of difficult the more outlines that you add, because pretty soon by week 8, you're going to be reviewing so many outlines, but that's okay because each one will go by pretty quickly. And also doing this will help you memorize the law and cement the law in your head. And really that's the best thing that you can do to prepare yourself for the bar exam. Okay, if you feel overwhelmed, which most people do, one of the common questions we get is, I can't memorize all of this, so what should I do if I can't memorize everything? Here are my tips for you. First, focus on the highly tested subjects. Okay, you don't want to focus on the law that you're not likely to see as much on the bar exam. You want to focus on law that's tested on the MBE and the essay portion of the bar exam. Focusing on the highly tested subjects will help you. Of course, you don't want to ignore anything, but you want to allocate your time most effectively. Prioritize the highly tested portions of the outline. Like the MBE tests negligence the most, okay, out of torts questions. 12 or 13 of the 25 scored torts questions will cover negligence. And also, negligence is heavily tested on the essay portion of the bar exam. So make sure that when you're reviewing torts, you prioritize negligence. That's going to be very worth your time, and you're likely to pick up a lot of points on the actual bar exam day by prioritizing negligence. Spend less time on subjects that might not show up at all. All right, if something is less likely to show up, you don't know if it's going to show up. Typically, this is going to be like an essay question, okay? Like, you don't know if you're going to see a conflicts question or issue on your bar exam. So don't spend the same amount of time on conflicts of law as you do on criminal law. Some people, when I look at their study schedules, they literally treat every single subject equally, which is not a good idea. You want to treat the subjects that you know will appear on the bar exam as being more important than the ones that might not appear at all on the bar exam. Some common mistakes that we see students make, and these are typically mistakes that end up being time-consuming. The first biggest mistake we see students make is they don't put in the time. They just don't memorize. They don't know how to memorize. Their commercial course doesn't teach them. The idea of memorizing is overwhelming, so they just don't do it. Then the problem is they're spending all their time doing practice questions and they're being really ineffective with their study time, as we talked about earlier. Another mistake that we see people make is sometimes in their enthusiasm for memorizing, instead of doing something like covering up the law and jotting down the elements to see if they know them, they'll do something like rewrite their whole outline or retyping their whole outline really neatly. It looks really nice. But really, first of all, it's not really an active review process if you're just simply, rotely typing something without really thinking about it. And second of all, it takes a lot of time. You're going to have a lot of outlines. So to do this for every single outline is going to be extremely time consuming. So I don't recommend that you do that. I recommend that you use the outlines that you have and you memorize the outlines that you have. You'll be in much better shape if you do that. Next, some students try to make flashcards for every single part of every single outline. And while flashcards can be great, they can be great tools if used properly, it's unrealistic to think that you're going to be able to make a flashcard for every single part of every single outline. It's just going to be too much time, basically. So flashcards can be great tools, and here's how I'd recommend you use them. Let's say you're struggling with hearsay exceptions. Put hearsay exceptions on flashcards and memorize them that way. Okay, switch it up a little bit. Maybe you need to memorize crimes by putting them on flashcards. All right, but don't put your whole criminal law and criminal procedure outline in a deck of flashcards. Why not? First of all, it's going to take too much time. You have too many outlines. You can't do that for all of your bar prep outlines in the time that you have, assuming you're studying during a pretty, regular, normal window of about 8 to 10 weeks or so. Second of all, it doesn't really help students who really struggle with the law because you aren't going to get the bigger picture. If you have all these random, flashcards, criminal laws all mixed up in this pile of flashcards, you're not really going to understand, okay, here's crimes, here's defenses, you're not going to have a bigger picture of how the law fits together. You won't get that bigger framework. Versus if you're working with an outline, it's naturally structured in a framework that makes sense. So you'll start to kind of internalize that as you study for the bar exam. Some students make flashcards and then they feel so overwhelmed. This happens every bar exam where a student will email us or they'll call us and they'll say, I've been doing this all wrong. I've been making flashcards all along and now I have all these flashcards. I've never even looked at them. I don't have time to review them. What should I do? And the good news is if they realize that, great, they can start studying effectively. But what you don't want to do is get through the whole bar exam study period and realize it when it's too late. Okay, next, make sure you understand the law before committing it to memory. This is actually not a mistake I see as often, but I do see it sometimes, where students will know the law perfectly. They'll be able to recite the rules perfectly, but they have no idea what it means. And if you have no idea what a rule means, then memorizing it is nice. You'll be able to put a nice rule statement in an essay, but you're not going to be able to properly apply the law on the essay portion or the multiple choice portion of the bar exam. So make sure that when you're actually memorizing the law that you know what you're memorizing. If you don't understand it at all, your first step is to try to understand it. Join a study group, get a tutor, Google it, do something so that you can understand the law before committing it to memory. So hopefully these tips helped you learn how to memorize your bar exam outlines. Remember, it's so important that you do this before you start applying the law.